I reported my coworker to my boss because he's irresponsible. Even though I'm always 30 minutes late, he never has my workstation ready, only his. And when a call comes for me, he passes it to me even if I'm busy on TikTok. Mr. Guzman was yelling at me as if I'd committed an international crime, and the ceiling was literally raining on me with those cold streams from sprinklers falling on my head and soaking my clothes as if the building personally hated me. Nestor, my coworker, was just standing there with the face of a martyred saint, watching the cables spark near the servers as if that were an unimportant detail and not the technological apocalypse. My heart was racing, not from fear, but from helplessness, because nobody was understanding that I just wanted a quiet and healthy work environment. The sound was unbearable. People were running around like chickens. Still, the only problem seemed to be that I did something when clearly the chaos was already pre-programmed. And if you're wondering why I ended up in that ridiculous scene, I'll explain it from the beginning, because none of this was a coincidence. I'm Vivi and I work in customer service, or rather, I used to. And the first thing you have to understand is that this type of job isn't just about answering calls and smiling with your voice. It's about emotionally supporting all of society from an uncomfortable chair while they demand you be a robot. That's why I created a healthy routine for myself, a flexible, self-imposed schedule, because if you arrive at 8 on the dot, you get all the stress of the crowd, the full bus, people breathing down your neck, and that leaves you with bad vibes for handling customers. I arrive 30 minutes late to avoid that, and it's actually a benefit for the company because I arrive more relaxed, more calibrated, more ready to provide a service with human quality. People think being late means being irresponsible, but what it means is that I take care of myself so I can take care of others in that office. I'm not alone, obviously, because customer service is a nest of people who think they're indispensable. And there's Nestor, my coworker, the typical efficient guy who does everything quickly, but he does it with a horrible energy, as if everything were a silent competition. Nestor arrives early, sits down as if he owns the building, and starts preparing his space with a sickening precision. I saw him from my perspective, and it always seemed to me that he enjoyed being ready before everyone else, as if he wanted to show superiority, as if arriving early automatically wins you a moral medal. The worst part is that those people always think they're good for following rules, when in reality what they do is make the environment more rigid and unbearable for everyone. At first, I tried to be nice because I know how to get along, and I even made neutral comments like how great it is that he's so organized or that I wish everyone cared about the job. But over time, I started noticing weird details like micro-attitudes, like small decisions he made that only affected me. I'm not paranoid, I'm observant, and when you observe you start to see patterns. Nestor always had his desk perfect, his computer on, his email open, his water poured, as if he had an invisible assistant. And when I arrived, my space seemed abandoned, as if I were a visitor, not a worker. That's not a coincidence, that's a message. My need was simple and human. If he arrives early and is already there, turning on my computer and opening my email is literally a 1-minute thing. An act of companionship, of teamwork, of basic empathy. But no, Nestor systematically refused, as if turning on my computer for me was like giving me a kidney. Sometimes I would sit down and give him a look that said, "Come on, be a good person," and he would turn away as if I didn't exist or as if my presence were a nuisance. And the craziest thing is that I felt he enjoyed that little bit of power, that tiny thing of "I'm ready and you're not." Besides, customer service isn't like you arrive and in 5 seconds you're ready, because you need to emotionally calibrate yourself. I have a technique that works for me, which is watching TikTok, especially kitten videos, because that regulates the nervous system. It's science, even if people don't want to accept it because they're traumatized. I'd watch 2 or 3 videos, breathe, align myself, and only then could I handle customers without speaking to them in an aggressive voice. That's emotional control. It's professionalism, even if it sounds weird to people who think professionalism is about suffering. And right then came the worst part. Nestor had the audacity to pass me calls when he saw I was on TikTok. And you might say, well, it's his job to pass calls, but it's not about that. It's about the timing, about respect. He saw me busy, He saw me focused on my calibration, and still he'd drop a call on me as if he wanted to interrupt me on purpose. I started to suspect he didn't want me to be emotionally ready, because if I handled a call calmly, the customer would be satisfied and I would shine. And if I shone, his efficiency would stop being the only thing that made him special. So, of course, he had to sabotage me. I tried to solve it like an adult. I told him once without drama to please turn on my computer before I arrived, because that way I could get right into the workflow. He responded with a cold phrase, one of those phrases that sound like a rule, like, everyone is responsible for their own station. That phrase left me thinking all afternoon because it wasn't normal. It was as if he had rehearsed that boundary. And that's when I realized this wasn't a simple personality difference, it was spatial discrimination, because he was deciding which space deserved attention and which didn't. When you work in an office, space is identity. If your desk is ready, you belong. If your desk is off and empty, you seem lesser, as if you're an impromptu visitor. I wasn't going to let Nestor build a silent narrative in which he's the correct one and I'm the messy one, when I just manage a flexible schedule, and besides, if he cares so much about the company, he should understand that a team works by helping each other, not competing. So I did what any person with a sense of justice would do. I went to Mr. Guzman, my boss, because I'm not one to make scenes with coworkers, I escalate institutionally. Mr. Guzman is an office man, one of those who think everything can be fixed with emails and serious faces, but I knew that if I explained it well, he would understand. I entered his office calmly, with the dignity of someone protecting their work well-being, and I told him that Nestor only prepares his own desk, which is a lack of companionship and clear spatial discrimination. I also explained the issue with the calls, but not as me wasting time, but as what it really was. I was in emotional calibration, a necessary process to maintain my friendly tone with difficult customers. I told him that watching kitten videos is vital for my regulation and that Nestor, by interrupting me with real work, was sabotaging the quality of the service. Because yes, real work exists, but if you do it without calibration, it turns out worse. It's like serving food without cooking it. Nobody understands because they're extremists. Mr. Guzman looked at me with a weird face, like he was processing, but I interpreted it as him being impressed by my clarity. I spoke with confidence because when you tell the truth, it shows. I told him I wasn't asking for privileges, I was asking for equal conditions, that if Nestor arrives early, he should be a team player, he should get my station ready for me, and he shouldn't pass me calls when I'm adjusting my emotions. I even told him that if Nestor wanted to be efficient, he should be efficient for everyone, not just for himself. And that's when what was a very clear sign to me happened. Mr. Guzman winked at me. People can say it was a tic, that it was a reflex, but I know what I saw. It was a wink of complicity, as if saying, I got you. I left the office with a huge inner peace, convinced that finally someone had put things in their place. In my head, that wink meant Mr. Guzman was going to fire Nestor for not being a good team player, because that was the logical thing to do. If you have someone creating a hostile environment by not turning on a computer and by interrupting emotional calibrations, what do? You correct it. And as I walked back to my desk, I felt almost heroic, like someone who does the dirty work so the team can function better. I even thought that Nestor, when he found out, would realize his mistake and maybe even thank me for forcing him to mature, because sometimes people need an institutional scare to get their act together. I sat down, took a breath, opened TikTok with the tranquility of someone who is protected by authority, and waited for the moment when the work universe would serve justice. Comments from the main story. Anonymous user 1 says, so you arrive 30 minutes late because crowds give you anxiety, but you expect your coworker to come in early and turn on your computer as if he were your personal assistant, and on top of that, you say he sabotages you by passing you calls when you work in customer service. Literally, your job is to take calls, not watch kittens to calibrate yourself. The thing about the boss winking is on another level. You made up a whole movie to feel important while you let everyone else carry the weight of your lack of punctuality. Response from the OP, look. It's obvious you've never worked with the public or you're one of those people enslaved by the clock who think suffering is a medal. I don't need an assistant, I need a team, and a team supports each other. It doesn't act like a selfish robot. And if you think emotional calibration is watching kittens, it's because you have the sensitivity of a rock and you probably treat people badly without realizing it. At least I prepare myself so I don't explode. The wink wasn't a movie, it's intuition. There are things you can feel, but of course, you must be one of those who only understand if they have a giant sign put in their face. Anonymous User 2 says, spatial discrimination because they don't turn on your PC? Seriously, how ridiculous. You admit yourself that you arrive late by your own choice, and you get mad that the guy is efficient. It sounds more like you're angry that he does his job well while you justify yourself with TikTok. And the thing about the boss winking at you, please. That sounds like the man was uncomfortable and you made it up to fantasize that they're going to fire someone for not doing you favors. Response from the OP, ridiculous is normalizing that in an office there are people who think they're superior for arriving early and marking territory. But since you love that toxic dynamic, you defend it. I'm not angry at efficiency. I'm annoyed by the inconsideration, because you can tell when someone only organizes for themselves and leaves the rest to deal with the chaos. And if Mr. Guzman was uncomfortable, it's because he saw I was telling truths that no one dares to say. Bosses get uncomfortable when you show them the team's flaws. Anyway, I love how hard you're trying to invalidate what I experienced. Typical of people who never listen and then are surprised when the world explodes. Update 1. It's been 2 days since the last update and the atmosphere in the office changed as if someone had deliberately lowered the air conditioner's temperature. I arrived with my self-imposed flexible schedule, and you could already feel that weird tension, like when a family keeps secrets, but everyone pretends nothing is wrong. As soon as I sat down, I saw there was an email from Mr. Guzman about punctuality in all caps and with a passive-aggressive tone that I know well. Because bosses don't yell, they write. It was obvious to me that this email was aimed at Nestor because he arrives too early and that makes the rest of us look bad, as if the office looks lazy in comparison. Sometimes people don't understand that being extreme is also a lack of balance. And I felt that the boss was finally trying to bring his ego down a notch. Nestor was quieter than usual that morning, and that confirmed to me that he also felt targeted by the email. He sat down, opened his things as always, but with tense movements, as if he were trying to look innocent. I watched him and thought that maybe Mr. Guzman had already said something to him in private, because when a boss calls someone aside, the atmosphere becomes heavy. Nestor didn't even look at me, and I interpreted that as shame, like someone who knows they're being watched. And at that point, no matter how much people want to paint me as the bad guy, I had an impulse to help him, because even if he's unbearable, I do have a heart. I thought, if Nestor is so obsessive about his organization, maybe part of his problem is that he has too much stuff accumulated, too many files, too many folders, and that makes him rigid. Because that's how people are. Digital clutter becomes mental clutter, and mental clutter becomes mistreatment of others. So, when he got up and went to the bathroom, I saw a perfect opportunity to do something good without him feeling humiliated. I didn't want him to know I was helping him directly, because proud people can't tolerate it. So I decided to do it as a discreet, almost therapeutic act. I approached his computer like someone who is going to straighten a crooked picture on a wall, with that feeling that you're correcting something no one dares to touch. I saw his digital desktop full of folders with boring names, as if his life were an Excel sheet, and I felt emotionally exhausted just looking at it. And there it was, as if the universe had placed it in front of me, a folder named Pending Invoices 2023. It had too many files inside, it was obvious. Because the system was slow to load and I felt that was affecting the entire office's internet. Not because I'm a conspiracy theorist, but because everything is connected, and if someone has a monstrous folder, it weighs down the network. It makes my videos not load in HD. I did what any logical person would do in a shared work environment. I deleted it, not out of malice, but for collective digital health. I thought that releasing that weight would make everything run faster, that the internet would breathe, and that Nestor, without that burden, would also breathe mentally. It was like taking out accumulated trash, like throwing away old clothes that no longer match, a necessary cleanup. I even felt proud because I wasn't just thinking about myself, I was thinking about the entire office, about general productivity, about everyone's well-being, even if nobody knew it. When Nestor came back from the bathroom, I saw him sit down and move the mouse, and in seconds his face changed color. He turned pale, as if he'd seen a digital ghost, and started opening windows frantically. I looked at him calmly, waiting for him to realize the relief, waiting for that moment when someone says thank you without meaning to because they feel lighter. And when he turned to me with huge eyes, I said the most normal thing in the world in a friendly tone. "You're welcome. I freed up space so your mind could breathe." Because yes, it was a gift, it was an intervention. But instead of thanking me, Nestor started breathing weirdly, as if he were having a panic attack, and I thought that was an exaggeration. He made a call to the IT guy as if his world had ended. And I thought, of course, that's how obsessive people are. One little thing gets out of place, and they think it's the end. He was talking fast. He said a folder was missing, that it was important, that he didn't know what happened, and I listened to him thinking it was an unnecessary drama. If it was so important, why did it have such an ugly and heavy name? Besides, why keep pending items from 2023 and 2026 mentally? That's living in the past. When the IT technician arrived, I tried to help too, because if I was already involved, the logical thing was to collaborate. I explained to them that Nestor's computer swallowed the files because he types too hard and scares the hard drive. And I said it with total seriousness because it's obvious that energy affects objects. Some keyboards sound like machine guns, and that stresses out any computer. It's common sense. But the technician looked at me with a mocking face, as if I were a child, and it hurt because I was just offering useful hypotheses. Nestor was getting more and more upset, and that annoyed me because if he calmed down we could think of solutions. But he continued with that victim attitude, as if I had done something wrong when I was literally helping him. I tried to tell him that sometimes things happen for a reason, that maybe the universe wanted him to let go of that obsession, but he wasn't listening. The technician started using technical words like recovery, backups, permissions, and I felt they were putting on a show to blame me without saying it. That's a typical tactic. They speak to you in a language you don't understand to make you feel small. At that moment, I started to notice something else, a weird vibe between Nestor and the technician, as if they already knew each other, or as if Nestor had prepared that scene. The technician took Nestor's side without investigating the emotional context, and that seemed suspicious to me. I thought that maybe Nestor had already spoken badly about me before, that maybe he had already built an image of me as irresponsible. So, anything I said would sound crazy. And of course, if you already have a prejudice, everything fits to condemn someone. Mr. Guzman's email about punctuality was still in my head, and I started connecting the dots. Maybe the email wasn't for Nestor for arriving early. Maybe it was a trap to make me feel singled out and nervous. And if Nestor knew that would affect me, maybe he prepared himself to provoke me, so I would do something and then use it against me. Because yes, people can be that twisted. You don't need to be a movie villain, you just need to be resentful. And at that moment I felt that Nestor was acting more than usual, as if his panic were a performance. That afternoon Nestor barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was with a curt tone, as if I were a criminal. I tried to stay calm, continue my emotional calibration, but it was difficult because the atmosphere was full of judgment. Every time I opened TikTok, I felt eyes on me as if suddenly TikTok were a crime. Nestor moved around the office like someone collecting evidence, looking at screens, checking papers, and that made me uncomfortable because I can't live in an environment of persecution. I'm a sensitive person, I can't work feeling like I'm being watched. I thought about talking to Mr. Guzman again. Because he winked at me, so he's on my side. But I also thought that maybe it was better to let the process do its work. If I got involved, I might seem insistent, and I didn't want the boss to think I'm problematic when the problem is Nestor's rigidity. So I waited with that feeling that something was brewing, like when a storm is forming and you can smell it. And while Nestor continued to hyperventilate over his little folder, I kept telling myself that I did nothing wrong. I just removed weight. But people hate it when you improve their lives without asking for permission. At the end of the day, when I left, Nestor stayed longer than usual with the technician, and that seemed very weird to me. I saw them from a distance and felt they were talking about me, because when someone lowers their voice and looks in your direction, it's obvious. My mind started to imagine that maybe they were planning to file a formal complaint against me or invent that I damaged something on purpose. I left the office with a knot in my stomach, but also with a certainty. If Nestor was so nervous, it was because some of his control had been broken. And when an obsessive person's control breaks, they can become dangerous, so I had to be on alert. Comments from the update. 1. Anonymous user 1 says, I can't believe you deleted a folder called Pending Invoices 2023 from your coworker's computer because according to you it was slowing down the internet and preventing you from watching TikTok in HD. That's not helping, that's direct sabotage. And you still have the nerve to say, you're welcome, as if you did him a favor. On top of that, you make up that the hard drive gets scared because he types hard. Your logic is a blender without a lid, and the worst part is you tell it as if you were the victim. Response from the OP, sabotage is what people do when they accumulate digital trash and drag the whole team down with their heaviness. But of course, you only see the folder and not the collective impact. If he had so many pending invoices, that means he's not up to date, which means his efficiency is just a facade. But nobody questions the one who arrives early, right? And the thing about typing hard isn't made up. There are things you can feel, objects react, but basic people laugh because they don't understand that stress is also transmitted. Anyway, I'm fascinated by how you get outraged over some files and not over the hostile environment he creates every day by ignoring my needs. Anonymous user 2 says, you say you didn't want to humiliate him and that's why you deleted his stuff without asking. How generous. The funniest thing is you make up the punctuality email as an attack on Nestor for arriving early, when the most obvious thing is that it was for people like you who arrive late. And now on top of that you play detective saying the technician and Nestor are conspiring against you when they literally caught you doing something stupid and you can't own up to it. Response from the OP. What's obvious to you is always the most superficial thing, that's why you're so sure, because you never analyze anything deeper. That email had a very clear tone. And if you don't get it, it's because you don't have social intuition. I do. I read environments and nobody caught me doing anything wrong because I didn't do anything wrong, I did a necessary cleanup. But since you guys love to live surrounded by accumulated chaos, it seems like a tragedy to you that someone eliminates it. The conspiracy thing isn't playing detective, it's personal protection, because when people point fingers at you unfairly, you learn to watch carefully. But of course, you prefer to blame me to feel morally superior. Update 2. It's been a week since the last update, and the office turned into a weird place, as if someone had put a gray filter over everything. Nestor now puts a password on absolutely everything and ignores me with a dedication that I honestly find suspicious, because nobody tries that hard to ignore someone if they don't care. I'd see him type his password as if he were guarding state secrets, and to me that just confirms my theory that he's jealous of my management skills. When you make an obvious improvement, like freeing up mental space, some people feel exposed, so they get defensive. He started talking as little as possible, not looking at me, walking past me as if I were air, and that attitude seemed more aggressive to me than any argument. I tried to remain professional, continue my emotional calibration, work at my own pace, but it was difficult because the environment had that energy of silent punishment. Every time I needed something, like a quick piece of information or a case detail, Nestor would pretend to be deaf or respond with monosyllables, as if I were a burden. The most absurd thing is that in an office we all depend on each other, but he acted as if his job were a private temple. I felt he wanted to make me look bad, because if I don't have fluid access to what I need, then my performance is affected and that feeds his narrative that he's the efficient one and I'm the problematic one. It's like corporate manipulation, but the cheap version. That particular day I was already sensitive because the week had been tense, and on top of that my phone had no data due to a payment issue that my bank processed late, which is not my fault because banks do whatever they want. I was focused on staying calm when suddenly the fire alarm went off, and it wasn't a normal sound. It was a long, repetitive shriek, as if the building were screaming. People got up and started moving as if it were the end of the world. And I thought they were exaggerating because in offices they always dramatize things to feel like their lives have adrenaline. I stayed seated because, honestly, I was very comfortable, and I also thought that sound was the ringtone of Nestor's cell phone that had gotten stuck because he has those long, annoying ringtones that sound like sirens. Nestor got up immediately and started saying it was a drill, but his tone was so bossy that I automatically felt repulsed. Nobody gives me orders as if I were a child, especially not him, who doesn't even greet me. I saw him put on his jacket and gather his things as if he had a rehearsed ritual, and in my mind that meant only one thing. He was going to get a coffee and was using the drill as an excuse to abandon his post and leave me alone with that unbearable noise. Because yes, he's capable of that. His level of selfishness was already proven with the issue of my workstation. I covered my ears and kept looking at the alarm on the wall, that red box with its flashing light. And I thought that if the sound was Nestor's cell phone, then the logical thing was to silence it so the environment could return to normal. Because if he left his phone ringing, that's acoustic irresponsibility, and I wasn't going to put up with it. I got up with that impulse for justice that comes out when I see something done wrong and looked for a quick solution. I had no idea how to turn off an alarm because they never explain anything about those things. They just install them and expect everyone to magically know. That's when I saw water on the desk and my brain connected the obvious. Water calms, water puts things out, water silences. If you have an electrical sound that won't stop, water cools it, turns it off, cuts it. I wasn't thinking about causing damage, I was thinking about stopping the noise and recovering labor peace. Besides, if it was a drill, there couldn't be real consequences because the word drill means it's not real. So, from my logic, I was just solving something annoying in a controlled scenario. I approached the alarm and threw the glass of water on it decisively, like someone doing something necessary and brave while others run around without thinking. In the same second, there was a crackle, like a sparking sound, and the light flickered weirdly, and I felt a vibration in the air that made me step back. The alarm stopped for a microsecond and I thought, there, it worked. But then what nobody expected happened, not even me. The lights went out in a part of the office and suddenly the real sprinklers activated, with brutal force, as if the ceiling had exploded into rain. At that moment, everyone started screaming, but not normal screams, screams of real panic. And I froze because this didn't seem like a drill anymore. The water was falling like a waterfall, and I saw how the desks, the computers, the physical folders were getting soaked, and the worst part is that the water was heading towards the server area as if it had a target. I saw two people running towards that area and heard someone say the servers were getting wet, and that gave me a chill because that sounded expensive, but I was still thinking that the root of the problem was the initial noise. That noise I attributed to Nestor's cell phone, because if he didn't have those eternal ringtones, I wouldn't have reacted. Nestor came running back with a scared face, as if he suddenly cared about the office, and looked directly at me as if he knew something. I felt his gaze was accusatory, and that infuriated me because he had no right to judge me when he had left without turning off his phone. I tried to say that I just wanted to silence the noise, but nobody was listening. Everyone was in chaos mode. In the middle of the water, Mr. Guzman appeared, soaked as well, and started shouting my name with a rage I had never seen before, as if I had planned an attack. The boss asked me what I did and I, with water falling on my face, explained as clearly as possible that it was Nestor's fault for having such a long and annoying ringtone and for leaving without turning it off, because I only reacted to protect the work environment. I told him that if he had been responsible, nothing would have happened, because I wouldn't have had to take action. But Mr. Guzman wasn't in comprehension mode. He was in punishment mode and started saying that I had caused a short circuit, that I had wet the servers, that it was very serious. I tried to argue that if a system gets damaged by a glass of water, then the problem is the system's design, because a work environment should be resistant to basic accidents. But nobody was willing to listen to logic in the midst of the collective hysteria. Nestor was behind the boss with a "I'm the victim" face, and that made me feel so helpless that I almost started to cry because it was obvious he was enjoying watching me fall. I felt he had won, that his strategy of leaving me isolated and tense had worked, because when you corner someone, that person makes impulsive decisions. Mr. Guzman took me to his office, soaked and trembling, and told me I was fired on the spot. Just like that, without a process, without analysis, without considering my intention. I was in shock because I've always thought that work is more than rules, that it's also context, but to them I was an easy problem to eliminate. I told him it was unfair, that I was just trying to silence the work environment so I could work better, but he kept that hard face of a boss who doesn't see people, he sees risks. They handed me a paper. They asked me to collect my things and leave as if I were a public threat. I left the office soaked, with my hair stuck to my face, with my things in a bag, and I saw Nestor at his dry desk, or at least trying to save his things. And I got angry because he was still there, intact, as if the universe were protecting him. I thought the boss's wink, which I had interpreted as justice, had turned into a trap, as if I had misread the signal. And that idea obsessed me all the way home. Because if you're wrong in your interpretation, then how do you know what's real? I kept telling myself that I'm not a bad person, that I did what I had to do, but the world is cruel to people who try to fix it. Comments from Update 2. Anonymous user 1 says, "You can't be serious. You threw water on a fire alarm because you thought it was Nestor's cell phone ringtone. That's not just getting your wires crossed, that's you lacking the basic manuals for living in society. And on top of that you blame him because he got up to evacuate during a drill. I mean, he did exactly the right thing while you stayed seated because you were comfortable. You got fired because you're a danger, not because you're misunderstood." Response from the OP. I love how you act like a drill expert from behind a screen, as if you've never confused things in your life. The sound was unbearable and people were acting like a herd without thinking, and someone had to make a quick decision so the environment wouldn't turn into a circus. If Nestor didn't have that obsession with eternal ringtones and if he didn't leave as if he owned time, none of this would have happened, because I wouldn't have had to intervene. And the danger thing is a dramatic exaggeration. Danger is a system that activates with water. That's company negligence, but of course, blaming the sensitive person is always easier. Anonymous user 2 says, "The saddest part is you don't even accept that you got fired for your own actions. You make up that Nestor cornered you, that he made you tense, that it was a trap, when the reality is you have zero self-control, and on top of that you think you're a hero for silencing the work environment. You soaked servers, activated sprinklers, created a disaster, and you still dare to say the boss didn't want to consider your intention. Your intention was to stay comfortable while others worked." Response from the OP. I'm not going to take self-control lessons from someone who clearly lives by judging others to feel superior, because that's also a lack of emotional control. I explained my intention because intention matters. And if you think everything is black or white, it's clear you don't understand how the human mind works under sensory stress. Besides, what a coincidence that I'm the one who ends up as the perfect culprit while Nestor comes out looking like a saint. When he had been provoking tension for days with his ice-cold attitude. That has an influence. Even if you all pretend it doesn't, and yes, I deserved for the context to be analyzed, but in that office they prefer to punish quickly rather than admit there are structural flaws. Update 3. It's been 8 months since the last update and people still believe I'm the villain of a story that's actually a chain of misunderstandings with someone else's bad intentions. I'm still without a steady job because interviewers don't understand my vision of a fluid schedule, and that frustrates me because I'm not unproductive. I just work better when I'm not suffocated by rigidity. I've been to several interviews where they ask me why I left my last job, and when I try to explain that it was a mismanaged noise incident, they look at me as if I'm making it up. Sometimes I feel like the word drill doesn't exist in their brains, because for them everything is literal and they punish without nuances. After months of uncertainty, a trial opportunity came up at a coffee shop. Something simple, something that was supposedly less stressful than an office full of screens and alarm tones. I thought I would do well there, because serving coffee is more human, more sensory, and besides there's soft music, pleasant smells, and customers who just want their drink, not to unload their life on you over the phone. My first day was a trial. I put on my apron, tried to smile, and told myself this was my second chance, that the universe always gives a rematch to those who deserve it. The funny thing is that as soon as I started, I felt a strange energy, as if the air was charged. And it wasn't normal anxiety, it was intuition. I was cleaning the counter when a customer came in, and when I looked up I saw him. It was Nestor. Nestor, my ex-coworker, the same one who ignored me, the same one who survived everything, walking into the coffee shop as if nothing, as if the world were his. My stomach clenched, and at the same time I felt a very weird emotion, because it was as if the universe was giving me a test of maturity and justice on a platter. I was happy, and I don't mean that in a sick way, I mean it because I thought I could finally prove I'm not a bad person. If I served him kindly, if I served him a good coffee, maybe he would realize he judged me wrong, and maybe he'd even feel guilty. I approached with my best professional face and took his order, and he looked at me with such a neutral expression that it seemed trained, as if he had come with a goal. He ordered a latte and sat at a table where he could see the counter as if he were watching. And that made me nervous, but I told myself I wasn't going to fall into paranoia, that I was going to be better. The coffee machine started making a weird noise, a strange bubbling sound, and I got scared because noises are always signs. In my mind, a weird noise means something is wrong, that something could go wrong. And I didn't want my first customer, who on top of that was Nestor, to get a defective coffee and then use that as an excuse to say I'm incompetent. So I decided to be smart and solve it quickly. If the machine was making that noise, maybe the water in the tank was altered, maybe it had that old office vibe, and I needed water that came out calmer, purer in energy. I saw the bathroom faucet and thought that water is direct, no drama, no machine pressure, and besides the bathroom was clean, so there was no problem. I know people obsess over rules, but in the end water is water, and if you boil it, everything is purified. I went to the bathroom with a small pitcher, got water from the faucet, and came back feeling efficient like someone who improvises solutions. I told myself that Nestor, upon seeing that I solved a technical problem without collapsing, would understand that I have the ability to adapt, that I'm not the caricature he invented. I prepared the latte and took it to him, and for a moment I felt at peace, as if I were closing a cycle. But Nestor didn't take a minute before he started sniffing the coffee as if he were a health inspector. I saw him wrinkle his nose, look at the cup, look around, and I felt that old chill of persecution. He looked up at me and asked me something he shouldn't know, something like where I got the water from, and I froze because I hadn't told him anything. That's when I understood that he spies on me or at least observes me with a sick intensity, because there's no way he would notice something like that without paying attention to me. Before I could answer calmly, he got up and went straight to talk to the manager, pointing at me discreetly as if I were an insect. I felt a mix of shame and rage because it was obvious he was trying to destroy me. The manager came over with a serious face, asked me what I did, and when I explained that I used water from the bathroom faucet because the machine was making a weird noise, he looked at me as if I had said I used water from a puddle. I tried to explain that it was a temporary solution, that the bathroom water comes out calmer, that I was taking care of the quality, but nobody heard the word quality, they only heard bathroom. The manager fired me on the spot, literally told me my trial was over, that it was unacceptable, and I felt like the floor was ripped out from under me. I was fired in 10 minutes as if I didn't even deserve to learn, as if I were a lost cause. Nestor remained seated with his coffee with that horrible calm of someone who gets what they wanted, and I walked out with the apron in my hand and my face burning. There on the sidewalk, with the street noise and the sun on me, my mind made a click that explained everything very clearly. I started to think it wasn't a coincidence that Nestor showed up on my very first day of my trial as my first customer, as if he had tracked where I was. And if he tracked that, then he has connections. And if he has connections, then he can influence decisions. And if he can influence decisions, then the thing at the office, the servers, the immediate dismissal, it all fits together like a plan. I know it sounds extreme, but when patterns repeat, it's no longer a coincidence, it's a structure. An inevitable theory formed in my mind. Nestor is the secret owner of all the companies in the city, and he's persecuting me so I don't succeed. Since then, my life has become unstable, because without a steady job you depend on others. And now I live on borrowed time at my aunt's house. My aunt is a good woman, but she's intense, and on top of that she takes blood pressure pills with ugly colors that don't match her clothes. I know it sounds like a silly detail, but colors influence your mood, and if she already has high blood pressure, why would she ingest colors that clash with her energetically? So I hide her pills so she won't get upset, so her body doesn't receive the wrong signals, but she gets very angry and says I want to kill her. And that's where everything becomes unfair, because I'm trying to help and people react with aggression. My aunt yells at me, tells me I'm a burden, that I don't respect anything, and I feel like I'm living the same story in different scenarios. And when she gets angry, I think that maybe she's also influenced by Nestor, because if Nestor is the secret owner of everything, then he can buy loyalties, he can poison environments. I see it in details, in how people become hostile right when I try to fix something, as if there were an invisible order to punish me. And at this point, the only thing I have left is to survive with dignity, even if I'm surrounded by ungrateful people who don't understand my vision. Comments from Update 3. Anonymous user 1 says, you got fired from a coffee shop in 10 minutes because you used water from the bathroom faucet to make a customer a coffee, and instead of saying, I screwed up, you decide that Nestor is the secret owner of all companies and is persecuting you. That's not bad luck anymore. That's you sabotaging yourself with absurd ideas and then looking for a villain so you don't have to accept that you're a risk to any place that hires you. And hiding your aunt's pills because they don't match her clothes is straight up sick. You're playing with another person's health for your mental aesthetic. Response from the OP. How easy it is to call it screwing up when you're not living the repeated pattern of being singled out every time you try to do something right. I used that water because the machine was making a weird noise and I wasn't going to serve something defective. In other words, I was ensuring quality, but you guys only hear bathroom and your brains melt with disgust. And about my aunt, if she gets upset about everything, someone has to help her not get worse. But of course, you all prefer people to stay just as bad while you look morally correct. Nestor shows up at the exact right moment, and you ask me to believe in coincidences. Sorry for having critical thinking. Anonymous user 2 says, the most terrifying thing is that you keep escalating. First you wanted them to turn on your PC, then you delete invoices, then you throw water on an alarm and soak servers, and now you serve coffee with bathroom water and hide medicine. You always say you're helping, and it always ends with someone getting hurt, but you keep saying the world hates you. It's not karma, it's not a conspiracy, it's you. And the worst part is that your fluid schedule isn't a vision, it's irresponsibility in disguise. Response from the OP. Terrifying is living in a world where people don't understand intention or context and only know how to label things to feel safe. I don't escalate. I react to poorly designed environments and people who cause tension, because if everything were clear and humane, I wouldn't have to intervene. You talk about people getting hurt as if I enjoy that, when the only thing I've done is try to improve things that others leave wrong. But of course, when a woman proposes solutions, they call her crazy. When a man arrives early and controls everything, they applaud him. My schedule is fluid because I'm not a machine. And if you all like living with a clock around your neck, that's your problem, not mine.